it's thinking. And there we go. And I'm going to share my screen right there. Okay, so you are here. Well, not yet. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Good to be with you. We are looking at a few things. Let me minimize this. Put that over here out the way. And off we go. We are looking at the time frame in Scripture between the Tower of Babel and the birth of ABRAM. So a lot going on there. Internet connection is unstable. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm so excited to move out of the mountains and come to an area where we could have wide open spaces and clear internet now. Nope, not quite. So we're in the time frame scripturally of Genesis chapters 10 and 11. Right now, after the Tower of Babel, we're looking in the 2400s BC. So in this post-Babel world, we're seeing the world that Peleg, who was born right after the Tower of Babel, named for the event, that he grew up in. We have 5 generations alive right now, including Shem, survivor of Noah's flood, on down to Peleg. And specifically, we've been looking at the descendants of Ham and their explorations into Africa and Egypt. So we're continuing our visual tour of all of that as we go here. So right now at this time frame, Nimrod is still king of the city of Uruk, which is Erech, E-R-E-C-H in our Bibles. The city-state of Kish has 2 lines of rulers, one probably civic, one probably priestly. Atab is king of one, Ilku is king of the other. And right now in Egypt, we've seen the development of the first dynasty after Scorpion King fought off the invaders from the Tower of Babel refugees and got the kingdom united through Narmer, who might be Nimrod, and then through Menes. And now we're under Pharaoh Zur, ruling in Memphis, Egypt, of the first dynasty, the Horus king there. Now, a lot of what we saw last week is from a video that's available on YouTube for anyone nerdy enough like me to want to check it out. It's called Giza Before the Pyramids, presentation by archaeologist David Roll. And some of today's stuff will continue from that. Now, what happened last week, I didn't realize this till later, about a third of the way into class, while everything was great on the laptop and great on the screen here on the projector, those online on Zoom, the screen went black. So I don't know what button I hit wrong, but for those who missed, just real quick, gonna show you 2 things as this pops up here. We talked about, as the spread from the Tower of Babel is going, the development of the city of Tyre, T-Y-R-E, in Lebanon, which is Phoenicia in the Bible times. So we're gonna start our field trip, launching out from home and heading over there. Take a look at this city. Ham's son Put went towards Libya and also north of Canaan into Phoenicia. Phoenicians come from him, and they also trace themselves back to Bahrain, which we're going to take a look at here. So there's the city of Tyre on the coast of the Mediterranean here. And just to share the screenshots for those who missed it last week real quickly of the beauty of this area here on the Mediterranean coast. Get that to open up here. It's thinking about it. Yeah, we're acting a little slow there, but that's okay. So one of the things we saw, in addition to the expansion into the city of Tyre, we saw that in Egypt, things were continuing. There we go. So hold that thought on Egypt. So here are just some visuals of the area of Tyre. Jezebel in the Bible, her father Ethbaal was king of this area of Phoenicia. In Jesus' time, the Syrophoenician woman who came to him when Jesus was up around the area, she was from this area as well. So here we see, now not everything is from the time frame we're talking about, but this gives you a sense of the area where this is happening. One of the things that we sometimes find ourselves falling into when we look at scripture, is thinking that what we're reading is the only thing going on in the world at the time. And that's not the case. Life is going on everywhere, and God is not apart from any of it. He is fully aware, intimately aware of all of it, even when he himself is not being acknowledged, even when people are actually deliberately trying to go away from him or contrary to him, as often happens in life. And so, as I like to say, we are looking at a Bible, not a bubble. Things don't happen apart from each other. In fact, the outside world often has an impact on the people of the Bible, and the people of the Bible should be having an impact on the world around them. And that's what we'll see. These aren't isolated items here. So our basic overall theme, as we look to all of this, is that on the one hand, we have the seekings and strivings of man, while on the other, we have the unchanging goodness of our God.
These photos are all still entire.
Yeah, exactly. And so let's see. So wrapping up Tyre. So there's Tyre of Phoenicia / Lebanon. There, what we're talking about here. That area there. The other thing we spent some time on last week, catching up those who missed the visuals, was the Sphinx over in Giza, the Great Sphinx of Giza. So if you're seeing the MyPillow commercials for the Giza Dream Sheets, this is the same area we're talking about. So that's loading 41%. So it's commonly thought that the that the Sphinx that's there with the pyramids was built at the same time as the pyramids. We dig a little deeper, as we saw last week. No, the Sphinx was actually repaired during that time, and we'll get to that when we get there. But the Sphinx was actually built right here within a century from the Tower of Babel. And so here we see that over here. Here we see a couple of those famous pyramids at Giza. And right here is that Sphinx. Zooming in here, facing the east. Lots of stuff is important spiritually with an eastward direction. So here's our guy there. And we zoom out here. As we saw last week, a couple of these shots that were just posted last month of the Sphinx. And again, imagine the pyramids not being there yet. Just giving us a sense. Showing some of the symmetry. Again, for those on Zoom, anytime you have any issues that I might not be aware of, feel free to shoot me a text and I'll see about fixing that for you while we're live in motion. Talking about the area in general. That causeway we talked about being very important, and we'll refresh that. So there's the body of the Sphinx. And at the time this was discovered, it was all buried under sand. This all had to be dug out of loose sand. It went centuries. It's only about that big. It went centuries without being discovered. So we're still definitely learning as we go with all of this stuff. So that is that. And so we found out that that causeway and the right there and the angle of that was important because everything about this Egyptian desert is based on the Nile River and the seasons and the floods. And it would annually flood the land and spread out its nutrients. And so we see that this 14 degrees off center, they were actually seeing when the sun would rise at different times of the year. And when the sun rose at that 14-degree mark here, that told them, okay, that season's ending. Now we're getting ready for the next phase and what's going to be happening here. Just as we're told in Genesis chapter 1, how we're given the sun and moon and stars to help us with a guide for the season and all that. So they'd follow the cycle of the Nile and the harvesting and their agricultural cycle along with this calendar here on the ground. And so they were smart dudes. And they had this all mapped out and figured out. So we think ancient people, we're much smarter than they were. No, I think we have lost IQ points as we've gone along. And a kind of society is dumbed down a bit. But again, we're talking God-given creativity, sadly not always used for God's glory, but for our benefit to be enjoyed under God and with God. So that's kind of where we last left off last week. 2773 BC being the time frame that I put for when Ham's son Mizraim came into Egypt. So now we're moving on to new and exciting stuff. And we're going to look at in the book of Micah after we wrap up this part on the seekings of man. For the continual goodness of God will be in the book of Micah if you want to find your way there and get that ready. But continuing on with what's happening here in Egypt, before the pyramids were built, underneath them, there are these secret grottos, underground caverns and stuff. In fact, there are the three main pyramids there, and each one has an underground item here. So that's kind of interesting. What's more interesting is that they were actually plugged from the top before the pyramids were put on top of them. So that's how we know they're before the pyramids, because those plugs had to be put in. They couldn't do that when there was a pyramid on top. Of course, it just occurred to me now, well, a pyramid's kind of a pretty big plug. That would have worked. But anyway, they wanted to plug it first. So here, so why does all this matter? Who cares? What's this got to do with anything or anyone in the Bible? Well, let's take a look here. The splendid place of the first time. The first time is what Egypt refers to these ancient days and their founding and originating after the Tower of Babel. So over here, we've got the constellation Orion. There's the star Betelgeuse, there's the star Rigel, and in his belt, I've got this written down, we have the stars Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, all right there, Orion's belt. So we've got these three pyramids here, and over here we've got Orion. So if we take a little closer look, before the pyramids were built, the center of these three grottos, so here the center of the three pyramids, and look at the alignment of, or the stars of Orion's belt, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The center of those grottos exactly lines up with the three stars of Orion's belt. And when the pyramids were later built on top of them, their centers were lined up exactly to coincide with that. Yeah.
Really?
Yes, there it is.
Really?
Yeah, a little hard to read in the light blue here, but those are the names of the three stars of Orion's belt. And it lines up perfectly. Yeah.
How do you plot something like that when you're way back in the past?
We have this thing in quilting called math.
Yes. Right, Sister Mary?
I should say.
That's
Yeah.
yeah,
Abacus,
my
yeah.
mind goes is how, well, but how do you even, how does anyone even think?
Exactly.
Anyway.
See, again, God-given abilities, but
They were navigating by the stars.
right.
So they were navigating by the stars. They realized their alignment.
Yes,
They realized what they were at. So
exactly.
there
Well
was
said.
significance to
Yeah.
the way that they positioned the pyramids.
Keep in mind, as we saw, Josephus talks about this, people were sailing, before the Tower of Babel. We saw the sons of Ham, there are basically two expansions. A small one before the Tower of Babel, specifically sons of Ham going around Saudi Arabia into Africa. And then after the Tower of Babel, that big dispersion with everyone all over the place. The Bible doesn't say Noah's Ark was the first boat. In fact, we saw where the Tower of Babel was built, the 17th tower in that spot. The city was originally called Eridu. We see it as Irad, which Enoch, Cain's son, named for his son Irad. Enoch, grandson of Adam, came down there. That was a marshy area, swampy area. The Persian Gulf there, coast, is further out than it was back then. The water was further in. It was a swampy area. They were sailing in boats made out of reeds and covered with tar and pitch to get around. And so they really did a lot of work there. So yeah, so sailing and travel and navigating were well known. In fact, they were able to recognize the changing of the tides and the winds, to where in July, they would park at the bottom of the Red Sea, on the coast of Yemen there, wait till July for the winds to change to help take them up north, the Red Sea along the African coast. So yeah, so people were aware of these things, the God-given nature and our discovery of how it all works and being able to put that to our use. God provided and we see what God did and then we use it. Now again, God should be getting the glory for it. He doesn't always. I put a note here. The first dynasty underground grottos before the pyramids were built to align with Orion's belt, pointing back to Nimrod. Orion is recognized, as we saw earlier, as a version of Nimrod. That's a great question. One theory, my theory, is that they're projecting the soul of the pharaoh into the constellation of Orion or Nimrod. And that because remember, they're really big in reincarnation. They packed underwear for the underworld. The pyramids, you know, they had all that stuff to go away with. And so that's a lot of where their focus was. And so a lot of not only traveling to the afterlife, but also reincarnation. Nimrod, Horus, all these different ideas, Osiris, there's the Holy Family, the son was actually a reincarnation of the father. And so the line of the pharaohs got their authority because they're basically the reincarnation of the last one, even though they were alive the whole time the other one was. So yeah, exactly. They don't worry about the contradictions in their mythology. They just keep adding on things and just it's all good and all works.
If you go and visit the pyramids, do they, I mean, is this known? Do they, like if I want to do the tourist thing, am I going to go and see a plaque that says that these align with Orion? I mean, is this something that is accepted in the academia world?
They might have that recognition of that scientific fact, but the special bonus you get here that you don't get there is the connection to the Bible. Right. Just like you talk about, we go to the natural history museums, we only get one side, one story. We don't get the other possibility. Mm-hmm. We get evolution, we don't get intelligent design and creation.
I just real quick, when we went to the zoo, we went and saw the little dinosaur exhibits, and Eric was like reading the little plaques, and then he's like, no, they're off on this. And so you know, he was correcting them. So
for free. And so the thing is, when you take God off the table, anything's possible. But when you use scripture, God-given scripture as your lens through which you view the world, it fits into place. It just makes sense. And it's beautiful. God, yeah.
Spots on their life where they would have made other pyramids to line up with the rest of the stars?
I'm not aware of any other pyramids having a stellar alignment. It's just this one right here that I'm aware of. Not to say it's not possible, but when I've looked at the other pyramids that we're going to be getting to, no, I haven't seen any other mention of that. But again, and Nimrod was reigning in Uruk, king of Uruk, during the time that Mizraim, the first Horus guy, went into Egypt. Egyptians don't call themselves Egyptians. They say, I'm El Mazri, I'm of Mizraim, the guy from the Bible, Ham's son, still today. So yeah, some wild stuff. Again, this doesn't happen apart from God. This doesn't happen apart from the Bible. This is all while the line of Shem is expanding from Peleg and will go on eventually to Abraham. This is the world that they're living in and what's happening. So we have, yeah, not yet. It wasn't, Hebrew slaves did not build the pyramids. It was Egyptian natives, and yeah, they would enslave peoples that they captured. The Hebrews, the Israelites, etc., as they later became, were not there at that time. We're going to see that. We're actually going to see. Exactly. Yeah. Short answer, the pyramids existed before Abraham went to Egypt. Yeah. So there right there is the tomb of this Pharaoh Zer, who's alive when all this happens. But he did not die alone. He was accompanied by 318 servants, who interestingly enough died at the same time. Imagine that, yes. Yeah, they all drank the Kool-Aid, yeah, exactly. Horrible analogy, but a relevant analogy, horrible circumstance, but a relevant analogy, sure. So over in Kish, we've got a new king, Ahab's son, Mashta now is king, and in Akkadian, his name means gazelle. Last times they had animal references. So the next king, Pharaoh Porus Den, which means spearer, is now reigning in Memphis. Over here in Egypt, the red there is the Exodus route. Over here, we've got Mesopotamia, the land of Shinar. There's the Tower of Babel. Again, the Persian Gulf was further inland at the time. So over here in Kish is what we're talking about here. Uruk is right over there, and we'll get to that in a sec. So while they're based out of here after the Tower of Babel, especially, they launch out from there to all these other places. So now this guy, Den, spearer, Pharaoh. According to Wikipedia, I know we have mixed feelings about that, but for loose general information, it's okay. Not specifically on dates and timing for especially these things. But one thing is they mentioned, just basic description, is it's recognized that he did not rule alone, that his mother reigned with him. So he's probably young at the time he became Pharaoh. And his mother, Meritneth, ruled for actually several years as he grew up. She was the de facto Pharaoh. She got her own tomb of royal dimensions and her own mortuary cult. So I'm looking at this going, wow. So Den's mother was ruling the world at the time. So yeah. Yep, exactly. Egypt, after Nimrod in Babel, Egypt is the world power because the invaders, because the invaders from the Tower of Babel inspired the Scorpion King to start conquest and start the unification of Egypt that went on through Pharaoh Narmer, who might possibly be Nimrod, and then through King Menes, who united the kingdom, the upper and the lower, and all became one nation. And he was the first Pharaoh of the first dynasty. And we're in that first line of rulers, that first dynasty now. Yep. So this is the first time a Den mother was in charge. For all of you former Cub Scouts. And so, yeah, I couldn't resist. And so during his reign, numbers start showing up in the hieroglyphs that they're using. Again, we're just taking a visual tour of what's happening during the lifetime of Peleg, the world that he's growing up in. And again, Shem's still alive too. Here's his tomb, surrounded by 136 subsidiary tombs. His is the first one to feature a staircase and a floor made of granite. Everything was mud brick before. And so more stone is being used. This is Pharaoh Den, Pharaoh of one of the first dynasty pharaohs. Yep, exactly.
And how do they find this?
Digging.
So they had to dig down.
Sand has blown over everything. Even today, with all we know, and this was mentioned in the Patterns of Evidence films, one of the Egyptologists said, with all we know, it still amounts to only rags and tatters, was his phrase, as far as the whole goes. So when people say, we don't see the Bible in this, it has no place here, well, you don't know enough to know anything yet. And we see clearly, the more we discover, the more it fits in line with the Bible, every single time. So 136 folks buried with him. They've actually examined the skeletons, and the examination suggests that they were strangled. So they were sacrificed to go into the afterlife with this pharaoh when he died. Yep, absolutely. So I mentioned Uruk, where Nimrod was ruling. Let's jump out of this for a second and head on over there. Okay, that's good. Don't get anyone dizzy. Okay, so we're going to zoom in over here. There's Kish. Right here is Uruk. Again, this is in our Bibles as Erech, E-R-E-C-H. This is where Nimrod began to rule after his father, Cush, was the first ruler. Nimrod is known outside the Bible as Enmer, Nimrod the hunter, Enmer the hunter. So this is Uruk in Mesopotamia, the land of Shinar. He's still king right now over all of this, while all this is going on. It was his building of the temple to the goddess Inanna in Uruk and building of the Tower of Babel in Eridu that led to everything that we're seeing now. He really wanted to worship this goddess and expand his power and his authority. That comes a little later from his great-grandson Gilgamesh. The first written words started here. We talked about this at the time. This is a swampy area, not a lot of natural resources. So when he was building this stuff, he had to get building supplies, and he wanted it to be lavish and glorious. So he needed a lot of wealth and jewels and things. So he sent his messenger over to Arada in the mountain areas to get it from the Lord of Arada. Well, his angry fussing at him got so long-winded that he had to actually write it down on those little cuneiform tablets for his messenger to read to the king. And so that's the first writing ever known about in history. And so, and there's actually symbols, you know, for the words. That started while he was king of Uruk. My family is a little on the claustrophobic side.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
This is an art form, how they would take these cylinders and color them and stack them like that. And you would get an end result like that. Yeah. Again, God-given talent and art. Artistry. And this is obviously a little later. This is the temple in Uruk that Nimrod built. Yep. No, that's not a photograph. That is an artist rendering. Yeah. So, and we've seen the one I've shown earlier, the one of the Tower of Babel at Eridu as well. So yeah, so this is what society is looking at like in the time between Peleg and Abraham. There's the gods there, possibly Enki. Again, it's all mud brick over here in Mesopotamia. They don't have stone or wood. So so what he did build, he had to import potsherds that are broken up in there as one society is built upon another. And symbol of the gods there. Oops. And there we have it. So that is where Nimrod is based out of when all of this is going down. So getting back to here, let's go now to China. Script pull down here. So we want number, you want number 98. No, we've already been there. We want number, scroll up here. Yeah. Probably at the time the little Google vehicle went around. Again, life is happening all over the globe as they've expanded from the Tower of Babel. According to legend and the Universal Almanac, a Chinese emperor, Shen Nung, develops principles of herbal medicine and acupuncture during this time. So that's an artist rendering of Shen Nung tasting plants to test their qualities on himself. So as long as he didn't taste any poison, test out any poisons, he did okay. Yeah, exactly. But he's a very famous ancient legendary originator of Chinese culture out there. So continuing on in Egypt, this pharaoh Anedjib, this is a stone bowl fragment that has his likeness on it. He actually is starting to show both the Horus falcon god and Seth Lord Chaos, who was defeated with the invaders from the Tower of Babel. But now they're seeing, hey, there's some benefit to this. So they're trying to get the best of both worlds, best of both gods. This is called, in spiritual terms, this is called syncretism. When you try to have your cake and eat it too, you try to just put them all together. It's more than polytheism. You're taking contradictory things and trying to add it all in. This happened when Assyria conquered Israel, and they reestablished the place. They kept getting killed. So they said, hey, send a priest from Israel over, show us what to do. So we told them about the one true God. They said, great, we'll worship the one true God and all other gods at the same time. It never works out well. And so they're trying to take the best of both worlds. He was buried with 64 other folks at the time of his death. Next, we have Pharaoh Semerkhet. And that bowl is in the museum in France right now. Yeah, I think this is where Winnie the Pooh got his inspiration for his honey bowls. Honey pots, yes. Exactly my thought. And so Pharaoh Semerkhet, that comes from him. And this was at his tomb, showing his name here, the horse falcon as the symbol there. 67 folks were buried along with him. And that brings us to Pharaoh Ka, the last pharaoh of the first dynasty. And that's comes from him to his tomb, and that's been restored. After his death, there was a war, a family breakout war between the royal houses. Now that the throne was empty, who's going to be the next pharaoh? And so that's why his death is considered the end of the first dynasty. And when it's all worked out, we have a new pharaoh. That'll be the start of the second dynasty. But right now, we're going to take a field trip back to Bahrain. So speaking of, and there's his tomb, by the way. And his was the last one to have a bunch of folks buried with him. That ended with the first dynasty.
So Eric, just
Yeah.
for my visual, when we look at these tombs, so there were layers and layers and layers, you know, on top of them. But were they,
pyramids,
were they, huh?
For pyramids were layered
Okay, well, no, I'm talking about these tombs, when
Nope.
you say they big.
alongside.
Was it open air or was it enclosed?
They were covered.
They were covered.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so,
So it was down, it was a like you said, a
Yeah.
grotto or a cavern,
mhm.
and then all of the
Yep.
the rooms.
Those were all the servants buried along. See, here's his, yep, here's where his corpse was put, and all the servants that were killed to accompany him, they were just plopped into all those holes. Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So was it, because it looked like a maze. is what
Yeah.
it looked like. But
Yeah, labyrinth. Yeah,
It wasn't, yeah, labyrinth, but it wasn't open air. And
right.
Were these accessible, or did they, once they buried them, they were done, and then that was,
Well,
did they add people to them?
they actually,
Was it like a graveyard?
definitely a graveyard at Saqqara, at Al Qab, definitely graveyard. And while it was supposed to be honored and reverenced, there were grave robbers. In fact, Ka, his grave, with all this drama and turmoil, his grave gets ransacked and actually gets restored under the new pharaoh. Yeah, but pretty much was supposed to be seen but not touched, you know, and left alone and respected. But there were grave robbers, there were plunderers, all throughout. And sometimes a little later on too, pharaohs got moved from one place to another, and when families became threatened, and so.
So the landscape was totally different. than
A bit,
what
yeah.
we know today, obviously.
Well, over the thousands of years, as the Sahara coming out of Noah's flood, it was lush, had all sorts of animals and things. And as the desiccation came along, and the desertification, I should say, then as it turned to the loose sand, then they kept going further north to where they end up now on the delta, recovering from Noah's flood. And right now, keep in mind, we're still in the ice age. The one true ice age, which is a result of all that water from the oceans coming down as rain. Well, north came down as snow, glaciers. So they're melting now, recovering from Noah's flood. So the ice age lasted about 500 years after Noah's flood. Noah's flood, 2893 BC, so about 2400, we're not there yet for the ice age to phase out. But we're still recovering from that.
No, there was not Captain Caveman.
But no, we showed early cousins of Shem and Ham. They're not cousins, but they're kids and their cousins. They had other kids, other sons and daughters, how they were like the first cavemen. And we've got their markings and stuff. No, not Captain Caveman, no. So over here in Bahrain, we've got, you'll see here, burial mounds. Showed this a couple of years ago, but let me show you now where it fits into everything we're talking about here. This is on Bahrain Island. These are the tombs of gods. Yes, gods die and get buried. And so, again, remember, Phoenicians traced themselves back here to Bahrain. It all came out from there. And so, place of the ghosts is one of the phrases, the underworld of the soul, sacred burial ground for the dead gods, near an entrance or exit to the underworld abyss is supposed to be found. Remember, Bahrain means land of two waters. You could dive into the salt water and get fresh water underneath. And so whenever they had that freshwater access to the salt water, that was a holy place that they would honor and see access to the underworld of the dead. So we actually have people buried in these as well. It's not just people who've been elevated to God status, not just the mythological gods. Some of the shots are a little better than others. Okay. I want to show you one other spot just to give you an idea of the size we're talking about here, give you some perspective. So not far from here, go right over here to this spot right there. Move me out of the way. So Egypt looked back to Bahrain and called it the Blessed Isle. Sumerians looked to Bahrain and call it the abode of the blessed. Further in Mesopotamia, they call it sacred Dilmun. They believe that their gods are buried here. And if gods are buried there, that's a good place to be buried too. So people would buy plots of land, buy these tombs to be buried in. There are these big royal ones. And there are also lots of smaller ones. We see the tour guides taking folks around there. But there you get a sense again of the size and scope that we're talking about here, later decorations there. So basically, there are more graves here on this little island of Bahrain than we have found in Egypt. In fact, there is nowhere in the world like these cities of the dead here on Bahrain Island. This was the place to go. In fact, let me go here. There's another example. Check this out. Right up along the city. All these graves are buried here. So all these places we hear about, the Isle of the Blessed, the Isle of Avalon, Valhalla, Abode of the Blessed, Elysian Fields, Field of Reeds, all these places existed and we can find them and go there. But here is, yeah.
All these mounds are unmarked graves.
Yeah. Yeah. Check this out. Yeah.
People are there.
Yeah. This is where you wanted to be. This was the place to go. Like I said before, this is like putting your kids in private school. This is like, hey, or a special school. This is that, and because the living population is spreading, they bulldozed over it for tract housing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And in fact, the villagers in that town are actually using these to be kilns for pottery. The ovens, yeah. See, there's a town right there. Yeah, you can go see this now on the island of Bahrain.
So they don't consider it like a sacred graveyard or anything?
Modern people don't have as much respect for what they honored in the past. Yeah, archaeological estimates of the numbers of burials have been climbing steadily, have now reached the 250,000 mark. Over 250,000 graves. And again, this was a high thing to seek and desire. Yeah, that's true. I haven't seen the Ghost Hunters episode for this place yet. But this is a good place to stop. And this gets us set up for the second dynasty, which will be very short. And then we'll go to the third dynasty and the first pyramid with Djoser. So yeah, bodies just plopped in. About 17% of the tombs don't have anyone in them. And for the royal ones, about 39% don't have anyone in them. They would make their plans, they would buy their space, and for some reason never actually make it there. So that's that. But let's close in the book of Micah. So that was a good amount of time spent on the things that the seekings and strivings of man and all the things that they find themselves doing. And so now let's go to Micah. Going to look at some words that are still applicable today, because remember, it was only the law of Moses that was closed out. The rest of the Old Testament was not. Law of Moses, about 3.5 of the first 5 books, where we got 39 total Old Testament books. Law of Moses took place during the 40 years of the wilderness. Well, we got 5,000 years of God's history with man here that still applies today. Micah chapter 4, verse 2. Again, contrasting this with everything we've seen. Many nations will come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways and that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the law, even the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for mighty distant nations. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. George Washington referred to that with Roman Cincinnatus when he said he wasn't going to run for a third term as president. I'm going back to my fig tree. So it's a very popular theme there. Though all the peoples walk each in the name of his God, as for us, we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. In that day, verse 6 declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather the outcasts, even those whom I have afflicted. I will make the lame a remnant and the outcast a strong nation, and the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion. Skip down to chapter 5. Verse 2, very famous. But as for you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. Referring to Christ, of course. Skip down to verse 5. This one will be our peace when the Assyrian invades our land. When he tramples our citadels, then we will raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 leaders of men. They will shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, the land of Nimrod at its entrances. And he will deliver us from the Assyrian when he attacks our land, when he tramples our territory. What's interesting about this is that not long after Micah wrote this, Assyria conquered the 10 tribes of Israel in the north. Well, this says it's going to go the other way around. Well, Assyria has a place in the future, and spiritual Nimrod, etc. King of the north kind of factors into all that. Closing in chapter 6, picking up in, well, actually we'll close in chapter 7, but in chapter 6, verse 6, with what shall I come to the Lord and bow myself before the God on high? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Does the Lord take delight in thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with your God? That's the background for that verse that we love quite a bit. And closing in chapter 7, starting verse 5, do not trust in a neighbor. Do not have confidence in a friend. From her who lies in your bosom, guard your lips. For son treats father contemptuously, daughter rises up against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own household. Jesus Christ quoted that. But as for me, I will watch expectantly for the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Do not rejoice over me, O my enemy. Though I fall, I will rise. Though I dwell in darkness, the Lord is a light for me. Verse 15, as in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, I will show you miracles. So that's going to be coming. Closing in the last 3 verses, 18. Who is a God like you who pardons iniquity and passes over the rebellious acts of the remnant of his possession? He does not retain his anger forever because he delights in unchanging love. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. Yes, you will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. You will give truth to Jacob and unchanging love to Abraham, which you swore to our forefathers from the days of old. And that's our unchanging God and what we have to look forward to with him, and how the rest of the world someday is going to see the same God we're worshiping now. So every knee will bow, and now's the time to do it before then. Any final thoughts, observations, comments, questions on any of this adventurous stuff? If not, we'll go ahead and break for today. Let's see, stop the screen share.